Welcome, builders. Today we have Michael Maas joining us. He is the founder and CEO of Zimi Charge, and they are a fleet management service that is looking at helping build the infrastructure to charge electric vehicles and the fleets thereof. Super interesting to hear about the space in South Africa, where it is at the moment, and the opportunities that lie within this vast growing space. Still early days, so it was super interesting to talk to him. If you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button as we continue bringing you some founders from South Africa to tell their stories and share their anecdotal advice on how to be a successful founder in South Africa. Enjoy the show. Welcome, builders, to another episode of How Would You Build It? Today we're talking EVs. We've got a guest coming from Zimi. His name is Michael. Welcome, Michael. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Like, it's good to have you. And Rainier, the co-host, the sidekick. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Bobby. Lucky to be here. Keen to learn more about EVs and how we can use EVs when the power is off 12 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's been a bit kinder to us of late, which is nice. But it is quite an interesting space because we all know of a certain Elon Musk that has kind of popularized electronic vehicles globally, right? And he's building factories in China, and Tesla's going strong there in Texas now, and they're building in Germany. So there's clearly a future in it. Everyone's talking about renewable energy. Everyone's talking about going cleaner. But in South Africa, like Rainier just alluded to, we can't even keep the lights on 24/7. So I'm just trying to understand, Michael, where is EVs in South Africa? Where are we on this journey, especially when you compare it to the Teslas of the world?
Yeah, it's a very interesting space because I think it's become quite real for most South Africans, right? If you're thinking of your day-to-day life, you're sitting sometimes with stage 6 load shedding where you've got significant power loss, and I mean for most businesses as well. I mean, it's impacting livelihood. So it's quite cool actually when I speak to a lot of clients about inverters and batteries and energy. They know the specs, right? they've had to become like electrical experts in certain ways. So it's kind of on both sides. But yeah, I think EVs in South Africa is still very, very early. I think if you compare it with industries like in Europe, let's take the Netherlands as an example, we're, let's say, anything from 5 to about 7 years behind them in terms of consumer adoption. Wow. So we've only got, I think if you think of South African roads, we've got about 12 million vehicles on our roads. Mm-hmm. And of that, we have, from the latest figures, less than about 5,000 EVs. Let's say, I think 2,500, 2,600 in the latest count. So it's a very, very small amount of vehicles on the roads currently, but it's poised for massive growth. So if you think of the adoption in Europe and in America and in Asia, that adoption was really driven by a lot of incentives. It was driven by a lot of regulation, like thinking about decarbonizing transport, which is extremely important for climate change. So I think it's still early days in South Africa, but I think we're on an interesting path going forward.
Mm. So tell me, how did you get into the frame? I'm going to try and tackle this, knowing that electricity is just a challenge in general in South Africa. What gave you the kahunas to say, I'm going to take this on and create a business?
It actually started with thinking about solar renewables. I wanted to start a home solar company. So I was thinking about load shedding. I was thinking, if I'm someone, I've got a house, I've got kids, or I've got a business, I want to install solar and battery because, first of all, the pricing is right. In the market trends, solar is cheaper than coal. You need to just cater for how much battery life you need, and then that impacts your price. But what happens? Let's say your solar system costs you 200,000, 300,000 rand capital upfront. Most people don't have that lying around. And this was before the days of when the banks came and offered finance on your bond and things like that. So I was thinking, how could I step in and create a solar system, like a spec for a house? And how could I sell that to consumers, but also then go and raise debt to finance these things? And being a first-time founder, I found it quite daunting to actually raise debt. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know who's going to be giving this guy.
No one knows where to do it, even experienced people.
Yeah. So I thought, damn it, I'm gonna have to go and figure this out, and it's going to be quite a big hurdle to start this type of company. But there was something there for me. There was something around the energy space around renewables. And I started diving a bit deeper and thought about vehicles. Like, why aren't we also electrifying vehicles? What's happening there? And I just became quite curious about, like, where are the issues? Like, why aren't we there yet? And then, I just started Zimi.
Yeah, I'm thinking, Michael, Europe, it's quite dense, right? So we've got a lot of people living close to each other, which means a lot of different things. One of it means the distances that people travel to where they want to get to is quite small. I mean, the size of the Netherlands, the Netherlands can fit into the Kruger National Park. So, driving from one side to the other isn't a day trip like it is in South Africa. And I know a lot of people don't do such long distance trips anymore in South Africa, but yet, most people commute 60, 70 kilometers a day to work and back. Well, not most people, a lot of people, both in Gauteng and in Cape Town. And, if you do a trip, on top of that, you can easily get to 200 kilometers a day, which puts you in kind of a risky area if your EV's range is about 200 to 300 Ks. And I know it's gotten better, but maybe, I'm the layman here, like where are we with that? Is it practical for South Africa, given the longer distances that people need to travel to make use of EVs?
Yeah, so I think it's important to think about the market in two segments. So we always think of the private market and the public market. So private being B2B, like logistics, delivery, etc., which we're focused on, and then public being the consumer market, right? So I want to buy a car. What car do I need to drive on my daily commute? And the distances in those two is much different, right? So if you think of a private market vehicle, like they typically, let's say delivery, let's say logistics, right? So you order something on Takealot, drop it off at your house.
Uber Eats or a Mr. D or a...
Exactly. They tend to not necessarily do more than 150 kilometers a day, strangely enough. So they'll typically have ranges of less than that. Which makes EVs like a really great fit, because the EV ranges in those classes of vehicles is already there and it's comfortable, and we can roll that out. On the consumer side, you have luxury vehicles, right? So you have the BMWs and the Audis and the Mercedes Benzes, which can also do quite a significant range. They can typically do anything from 300 to 450 kilometers on a battery charge. But in the luxury segment, I mean, they're typically 750,000 up to about 2-3 million rand, right? So they're quite expensive. So I think if you're thinking of purchasing an electric vehicle as a consumer, it will really depend on your commute, right? It will really depend on your day-to-day movements. Typically, people don't drive, as you said, more than 200 kilometers, but you can buy an electric BMW and you should be able to do that comfortably if you can then charge at home overnight, or if you can go and top up at a public station. Our focus is in the private market, and there it runs on a much more repeatable schedule. So it's much more of a rhythm. So they'll ensure that the vehicle's charged at night, then do the deliveries all on a full charge during the day. Repeat every single day.
Okay, so it's really in this last mile space, right? And I mean, do you see an opportunity that I've seen for a long time is a lot of these companies want to do last mile deliveries, but setting that up is quite complex, right? And capital intensive, and there's a high degree of risk and overhead, right? Because you're going to hire a few drivers in a specific area. If you don't get enough orders or enough deliveries, then you're burning cash quickly, right? So in order to deal with that scale, like last mile as a service I thought is a business that can be very viable. But do you see the same kind of growth going forward, that becoming like a really big thing in South Africa?
I think that's an interesting question. I think if you're looking at like a typical logistics provider, their operating margins like 6 or 7%. You can look at like DHL Global. So they're facing a big cost issue, and these are players that have been in the market. They're established. They've been doing it for a long time, and they're struggling to get that. So I think logistics is quite a challenging environment. And kind of to speak to that, that's one of the reasons why they want to switch to electric vehicles. The primary driver is cost savings. Moving from fuel to electric is much cheaper for them.
I want to touch on that, by the way. Carry on.
Yeah. So the second thing there is then the environmental impact. But I think to answer your question, I think definitely with some of the logistics providers we've been talking to, it really depends on the setup of that network. So if you think of, for example, here between Stellenbosch, Paul, we've got, this is where we're based. We have, somebody who does, for example, Takealot deliveries between Paul and Wellington. Like they're based in Paul, they're collecting at that distro, and they're doing trips to Wellington because there's nobody else that does that route. So they have, let's say, a couple of vehicles, and for them it's perfect. So they just have like a set route. They know that they have reliable amounts of orders coming through, and they can plan that. So I think building a logistics company from the ground up, capital intensive, low operating margins. I think if you can find an area, so for example, if you think of outlying areas, like for example Greyton, where I spoke to someone around like deliveries in Greyton, because again, you know, if you can be the one or two vehicles in Greyton, you're going to have a great business. Like I think you're going to do well. But I think scaling that up across the country, you're competing with UPS, DHL, FedEx, Courier Guy, just to name a few.
So I want to touch on that unit economics, because when I was told that it's actually a lot cheaper to do these, you know, logistics, the deliveries, the cost versus petrol is a lot cheaper on electricity. I don't think we think about it. I think we just think we have one energy source, it's called petrol, and that's how we, you know, fuel our vehicles. Now we've got this, this new source of energy being electricity, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper. So if we forget about the scarcity and everything else that we always reference as a South African, it actually turns out it's a lot cheaper. And the more efficient your technology, apparently, the more efficient it becomes, more cost saving it becomes. Do you want to explain above what I've just kind of touched on?
Yeah, I'll dive into maybe a bit of the financing, because I think that's a really important component to understand with regards to running an electric fleet, or even for yourself, right? If you want to buy a vehicle and you want to determine if it's going to be cheaper or not. So you typically have the upfront cost of the vehicle, which at the moment for EVs is typically between 20 and 30% higher, depending on the vehicle that you're comparing it with. So the upfront cost is higher, which means that your cost of finance is higher, right? So if you're taking a loan on that vehicle or you're getting it financed, your repayments are higher. Your main operating expenditure is your fuel, so your petrol, your diesel. If you're switching that to electric vehicles, it's up to 90% less, right? So you're cutting your costs to a tenth on the operating side, 90%. But you've got to look at what's called the total cost of ownership, which takes into account everything, right? Maintenance, tires, lubricants, financing, electricity, etc. So that's the true saving. And we're seeing with our early pilots anything between 30 and 40% less. That includes everything. That's the infrastructure. That's the whole ownership saving. It's almost half. Driving your fleet costs. Yeah, exactly. And you can even optimize that, right? So if you're thinking of pulling in things like renewables, if you're thinking of how to structure finance with your bank, there's lots of things that you can tweak. But we see typically between 30 and 40% TCO reduction on that. And it could be the same for a consumer as well, right? So I don't think it's that much different.
Yeah. So what is like the average distance that one can travel on a kilowatt hour on a small vehicle?
you're gonna hear a lot of it depends, right? So it always depends on.
Of course, it depends. But like, I mean, I'm trying. I think a lot of people, know how much they get on a kilometer. How much do they get on a liter of petrol? So just putting it in perspective, I think would be interesting.
Yeah, so if you think of like a typical delivery vehicle that we're using now, you get about 150 kilometers on 10 kilowatt hours. So that can give you, just do the math. It's too late in the day for me to math at the moment. And then if you're taking, for example, something like an E-Up or a Volkswagen ID3, I think you're getting. I'll have to go double check it, but I think you can probably, with a 20 kilowatt hour battery, you're probably getting about 240 kilometers. Yeah. So about in that range.
Interesting. Now, I want to kind of dive into Zimi itself, right? Because if I go and look on your websites or your LinkedIns and stuff like that, you've got QR codes. Obviously, you've got the rechargeable stations. How does it all work? Like, tell us exactly. You've got a software element and a hardware element. Can you just explain the setup that Zimi is kind of put out there as it stands today?
Yeah, so Zimi is really helping empower electric fleets. So we're working with fleet operators in the logistics, delivery, and last mile space to really help them transition to electric vehicles and to make that as seamless as possible. So we offer two main elements. One is infrastructure. So it's charging stations installed at locations.
And that would be a petrol station, right?
It's like your own little mini petrol station. That's it, at your own location. And then the analytics and the software behind that. So around the modeling of energy, carbon, and helping to manage payments.
Okay. And I mean, how capital intensive is it? Because I see photos of this like little machine or whatever it is. It looks like they're filling up with petrol. Is that it right there? Can you
This
explain?
is it. This is the Zimi Charger. This is my
Okay.
hand, just for scale, so that you can see almost how big it is.
Can you
So
give us
this
a
is
demonstration?
Do you have a banana for
I don't know.
scale?
I don't have a car parked in my office. We'll organize a site visit and I'll give you a demo. So if you think of charging, you typically have two types of chargers. You actually have three classes of chargers, but in general, if you're in the public charging, you have two types. You have AC and DC. AC being up to about 22 kilowatts rating, and then DC going up to 150, 250, depending on which one you see. And the difference there in the kilowatts is just the speed of charge, right? So if you think of a charging station, it's rated at how quickly can it charge a vehicle. But that's not the only component. The vehicle is also a very important component. So the vehicle also then limits the charge depending on the charger's capability. So you could have a very fast charger, but a car that can only take a little bit of power, so then you're limited by the car. So that's how it works.
Okay.
And you've got a socket here. So you've got a socket here. In South Africa, we've standardized to the Type 2 socket, which is the European standard for sockets, and you'll have a cable for your car. So you'll literally, like you're plugging in a device. You literally just have the cable plugged into your car. You plug it in there, and then depending on how the authorization set up, for example, with us with the fleets, it all happens automatically.
So Michael, there's this school of thought, or at least people unpacking why Tesla's stock price is what it is. That thinks one of the main reasons is that they are busy installing supercharge stations across America, and they'll have the monopoly soon. And as all these other EVs hit the market, you can charge at the Tesla charging station, but you can't supercharge at that station, which will limit you in terms of your range and convenience of using this. Do you think that is something that gives them a strategic advantage, and do you foresee South Africa also going to go into a stage where there's a land grab and you go, whoever gets the most charging stations across the country will probably have a bright future?
I definitely think so. I think it's definitely an advantage, and I think definitely the players in South Africa who can strategically find space to charge in the public will definitely be there first, and then it will saturate at a point. If you think of, for example, South Africa, the most comparable thing is a forecourt or a petrol station. So I'm actually quite surprised in South Africa we haven't seen a lot of EV chargers at, for example, Shells and Engines and those players. So I think whoever can tie into a network where you have good retail with charging, which I think for me a petrol station makes a lot of sense, they will definitely dominate. But we've seen some of the public network providers really going for shopping centers, going for farm stalls, so it you don't know, maybe perhaps that changes driving behavior, but I think whoever gets in with the petrol providers will dominate the market.
Sure, that's an interesting concept. Never thought about it, but yeah, it's about that network of distribution, right? So like, who's going to be the quickest to distribute this? And as we understand, is it Maslow's law, whatever it is, things get cheaper over time. So as electric vehicles become more affordable, and now that just down the road you can but what about like being able to have a power station in your house? I mean, how far are we from having something like that?
Yeah, are you thinking of installing a charging station at your house?
Yeah, I mean, what does that look like?
No, it's very similar to what we do with our current clients. So you could just have this. You could have this installed at your house. There's nothing stopping you from doing that.
Okay.
It will just be dependent on the amount of power that you have available. So again, if you're thinking of, for example, tying it into your solar system, that could make a lot of sense. You could install it at your house if you don't have solar. That's also fine. So it's really just an advanced way of distribution for an electric vehicle. So lots of the private customers, or let's call them consumers that buy a private charging station, already do this at their houses. They just install a charging station.
Amazing. To connect your solar panels at home, Rene, you've got you can start a little petrol station there.
Yes, man. I already make great coffee. I just might as well sell coffee while people get a supercharge.
There we go.
There's an interesting concept, I think, in the UK where they've had a high adoption, where they tied into the lamppost. posts on streets, because
Oh, wow.
you're just tying to the power that they have available there. So if you're parking on street parking, you can charge. So yeah, there's
Amazing.
lots of
Wow.
ideas. You can monetize your house now.
Awesome.
That's the future,
Well, I
man.
can't sell it back to Eskom, so maybe I can sell it to people buying direct from me.
Exactly. Michael, you come from a product management background, and I'm quite curious. We've spoken mostly around the hardware side of your business, but tell me about the software side. So what software are you building? What kind of app is it? And what information do people get when they download your app and they link to Zimi?
Yeah, so we've got two main apps, and I always think of it in terms of just web and mobile. It's like an easy way to distinguish that, because we have it's two different products, right? Two different users. So if you think of a fleet operator or a fleet manager, they really want to be seeing how much energy have they been using, how much it's been costing them, if they need to reimburse an independent location, how do they report carbon to shareholders or to stakeholders. So that's the web app, right? So the web app is very much focused on analytics and showing you performance of your locations and your energy savings, right? So as you're making these cost savings from switching, we surface that for them on the web application. And then the mobile application is really about it's the driver app, right? So it's where the driver has the ability to control the charging station in the case where they need to, for example, go to a public station if they want to use that with some of our network partners, or if they themselves want to control the charging station at the location. So those are the two main software components, and then there's lots of underlying things behind that. So if you're thinking of us as a company, we're very much analytics focused. So thinking about things like carbon analytics and quantification, thinking about energy optimization, because we can do cool things like scheduled charging. So we can shift the charge to start at a later time so that you save money on your peak tariffs. And then if you're thinking of payments, also if you have locations that are independent, or you have drivers who need to be reimbursed, the charging stations then send that data to the cloud, and we can then say, cool, we know that this is the cost of the charge at that location, and then you can reimburse them and do reconciliation. So it's trying to really make all of those things really seamless and easy for anybody that's looking to transition, because typically they'll have to build a team to do that themselves, right? Or they'll have to go and commission some software to do that. So yeah, they can just use us.
Interesting. So is for your costings to your clients, is it all encompassing? So with the hardware, you get the software as a complement to it, or is there like a subscription base that comes with it? How have you done your business model for Zimi?
So there's two pricing structures, and pricing is such an interesting topic in product management. I think that's like there's so many experiments that you should be doing, and it's such we can do another podcast just on pricing. So we do on the charging infrastructure itself. So it's a turnkey solution. So we sell the charging station and the installation, and we can either do that upfront, so you can just buy it, or we do it financed, so you can do it as a finance, like fixed monthly cost for that over a time period, and then we sell SaaS on the charging software and analytics system. So we sometimes call it CaaS, charging as a service, just to kind of brand that.
Yeah, product managers love the acronyms.
Love it. IaaS, infrastructure as a service, is also a nice one to use. We try
charging it as a service. I mean, that's got a special ring. I mean, we're talking about costs, right?
Stellenbosch jokes, yeah.
My surname is Maas, so it's like Maas cars.
Yes, man. Look at us, branding geniuses. We should have been in branding. I mean, look at us. We could have been billionaires by now.
So charging as a service. So is that kind of looking at as the petrol station, right? So you can just come and charge whatever you need charged at your charging station, and that's charging as a service.
Correct. And if you think of the fleets, they're typically seeing this as an inclusive part of their shift to electric. So if you think of the alternative, let's say I have a fleet, I've got 30 vehicles at my location. If I didn't have access to petrol, or I couldn't go to a petrol station, I might install a petrol station at my location. So that some large fleets with large depots and distribution issues actually do that. They actually install petrol dispensaries at their depots. So this is the equivalent of that, but because it's electric, You don't have to dig up the ground to put in tanks. You don't have to get environmental protection compliance certificates. So you could install this at any location, and then you just have that as part of your fleet solution.
Okay. And what about battery management? I'm sure there's, because everyone's had a cell phone, that kind of lithium battery that after 2 years went pop. So like, how do you manage, like, how's battery life? How do you manage batteries? I mean, could you not just go and swap out your pop battery for a fully charged one at one of these things, for example?
That's actually what we're doing with one of our partners, and that's specifically for the bikes, for the motorbikes. So if you're thinking of delivery and you're thinking of bikes, that's already taking place. So because the battery is designed to be removable and swappable, you can do that. So that's quite exciting. For a vehicle, it's difficult because those batteries are heavy.
Yeah.
So they're very, very heavy. If you're thinking of a bike battery, it's like 20 kgs. So it's quite a lift. So you could do that, and that's great, because then you can obviously just kind of get going again. That I think with, for example, some of the fleets, they've been looking at, you get some of those like NFC type chargers where it's like you just drive over a charging pad and it charges itself.
Oh wow, that's
like
cool.
a charging pad, which is quite far out in my opinion, but it's cool.
That is.
You get in America, you get a charging robot that actually, let's say you rock up at a parking lot on the app, you order the robot, it goes and opens up your like a little flap, and it plugs in the charger and then charges your vehicle and then drives away. And then that's got a little battery pack on it, and then it just goes and loads and charges itself again. So there's an interesting overlap here between automation and energy and IoT, which is quite cool. I think, again, like with most products, you've got to decide what problem you're trying to solve and focus on that. So I don't think we're gonna be doing robots anytime soon, but yeah, there's some cool ideas around how it's like a new way of interacting with energy for your vehicle, right? So you're not limited. You're not limited to fossil fuels or to liquids.
Cool. So I want to kind of dive into your journey as a founder and kind of, what other opportunities exist within EV. But I just want to ask Renier, I just want to get your opinion on where do you see this industry? Because I think about a mental model that is being challenged in the world, right? In South Africa, we're a couple of years behind. I feel like there's a mental model that's being challenged here. Like, where do you see this going and the challenges that the industry is facing, besides the obvious ones?
Yeah, I think one of the big things when you talk about climate and Africa and climate, people don't at me, but generally in Africa, people go, look, we'll start worrying about the climate when people are out of poverty, because when you compare the different problems that people have, we have a lot of poverty and a lot of unemployment and a lot of other challenges, and then we've got this climate thing which we also need to consider. But if you weigh these two against each other, the sentiment is often that's not as important as some of the other issues we have. So I think from that perspective, if you talk EV purely from a climate agenda, I don't think you're going to make a lot of headway, simply because while there are people that care about it in Africa, those decision makers and the powers that be, I think they've got bigger problems to solve, at this stage. And I think that's often what I found in those kind of conversations and engagements, which then leads to the second point, which I've really found interesting in this conversation, is going, well, if it's economically viable, now it's a completely different conversation, right? So if this economically makes sense, and that drives it, and that's what I've always loved about Elon Musk. He didn't go into EV because it was good for the environment. That wasn't his primary motivation. He saw an opportunity to actually build a company that can be economically viable and be profitable, and at the same time push the human race to the next frontier of transportation, right? And I think that is so important when it comes to innovation. And we can track this all the way back to a completely different conversation, which is the work NGOs do. And there's a lot of NGOs that do wonderful work, but the challenge is always to make it sustainable, because if the mission isn't somehow tied to some economic incentive, or it's always just so much harder for it to be viable. So I think we're at a point now where people in South Africa, and Michael, you know way better than me, but people in South Africa are waking up and going, wait a minute, there's a cost benefit here. And we can make more money if we embrace this, okay? Now, this is where it's getting exciting, because now we're saying you're going to make more money, or you're going to save more money doing this, but the added benefit is probably better for the environment anyway. So I think that's where it gets really exciting, and we probably at the start of this. So Michael, well done for being at the front of the wave, but I really see this as, when we talk about electric vehicles. There's a guy in Stellenbosch. What is the Sun? You probably know them. The 3-wheel electric vehicles to do deliveries. Yeah. Sorry, Miller vans. Yeah, Sun. I'm thinking of Sun because they're yellow. Miller vans. They've been at this thing for, I don't know, 10 years plus, and they almost always, everybody thought, oh, it's so cool. Electric vehicles is good for the environment, but whenever you ask someone to buy it to save the environment, they're like, we're not so sure. I mean, they're only now starting to see some of these vans hitting the road, which I'm really excited for them for. But it's taken such a long time because the green agenda just wasn't big enough to make this thing work. But now that it's becoming economically viable, I think we'll see more of it.
And I think what I really like about the industry and where we're at is that we're in infrastructure. So we're on the distribution end of that, and it kind of ties in really nicely with energy generation. So you have all of these components, right? So you have the vehicle manufacturers, you have to have the supply chain for maintenance and service and battery replacements and second life batteries. There's all these little, there's all these parts of the industry that need to be built up and need to be developed. And from the conversations that I've been having and from the experiences I've been having is the best thing for the climate is to electrify everything, electrify whatever we can, right? And then push to renewables as quickly as we can, because again, not a one size fits all solution. It will be utility scale renewables. It will be, personal private renewables. It will be probably a mix of a bit of hydrogen in the future, maybe a bit of nuclear, depending on your opinions. So I think if we can electrify everything, let's do that as quickly as we can. But definitely, if it's not driven by cost, it's not gonna accelerate. If you look at countries that were even the first, it's always correlated with the incentives of government, right?
Yeah, and I think apparently, it's that thing of people like to think that companies have emotions and companies are, care about the environment. It's the people within the companies that might be care, but the company in itself, the company's number one objective is maximum profit. And I mean, I know Patagonia and all of those things, they're kind of anomalies, but the reason for existence for a company is to provide a return to the shareholders, right? And now if there's no economic incentive, it's really up to the people working within the company to drive these agendas, and in the process actually risk their own jobs because they might, limit the amount of returns that shareholders get. So it's really complicated to do it if there's no economic incentive, because the risk is quite big.
So Michael, we need to wrap up, but I'm quite curious. I mean, what we haven't covered in this conversation is that there are definitely many facets to EVs. It's not just a matter of having an electric vehicle. There is the recharging, there's the charging as a service, there's the battery management, delivery, last mile service. So if you were doing Zimi, where are you seeing the opportunities in the space that other founders like yourself could be tapping into, seeing as it's so early in the wave?
I see so many exciting opportunities. And I think, as a founder or as a product manager, I mean, prioritization and focus is critical. It's a daily struggle to really decide, this is what we're doing, this is our strategy, let's just execute this really well. But the things that I think are exciting for me, but what we're not necessarily doing, I think that the battery swapping is quite an interesting one. That's an interesting market. I think battery second life batteries. So what do you do with the battery when it's done? We're not going to throw them full, but they're still very much usable in terms of storage and things like that. Battery manufacturing and battery replacements. There's a massive industry in the lead acid replacement to lithium or lipo batteries, and battery pack configurations and cell assemblies. I think that's massive. I think afterlife support, or not afterlife support, rather, just maintenance support. So, how do you ensure that all dealerships and all service providers can actually test and maintain batteries and the electric vehicles, and how do they guide their clients on that? That's a big area that's not being addressed. And I think electric vehicle, just having more vehicles available in the market is such a big hurdle at the moment, just having options available. So I still think that, there are importers, there are OEMs that are bringing in vehicles, but I always think there's always an opportunity for more of that. So that's a tough one. I think, but, and like you said, there are some manufacturers in South Africa. So if you can build vehicles, that's brilliant. But I think it's a tough market to be in. But if you can import certain vehicle types and vehicle classes, that's exciting. I think those are and then I think, on the software side, we're trying to tackle a lot of the software things for B2B fleet management. So that's
fleet
us.
Nice. I like that. I think where the opportunity is, well, something I'm just thinking about is like, if you are able to showcase those unit economics, because I think people don't even think about it. It's not even like, they're not even actually putting that together. Like Renier was talking about, it's always seen as a green movement. It's always seen as a carbon thing, but actually there's an economic thing here. So it's like, there's this whole thing that needs to be showcased, that I think there's an opportunity. So if it's a software thing or I don't know, but like to prove the unit economics of going electric, I think that there's huge when everyone's trying to squeeze profits in this day and age. So I'm excited to see what people do in that space. Renier, any last takeaways from your side before we wrap up for today?
No, I think Michael's a smart man. When there's a gold rush, you can either sell picks and shovels, or you can try and build a gold mine. And I think these charging stations are definitely the picks and shovels of the upcoming gold rush that is electric vehicles. So I love it. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And Michael, just last question I just thought about is there any regulations that you need to be aware, like, that is holding you back at this point?
So in South Africa, the main regulations for charging stations is the type of socket, so ensuring that you have a compatible socket with the SABS standard. In terms of pricing regulations, that's set by NERSA, but they haven't really addressed that yet. I think they've been busy with with wheeling and with energy generation tariffs, but I think that will come soon, like where they have to set pricing on energy sales from charging stations. And then, of course, when you're doing electrical installations, you have to conform with what's called the ECB, or the Electrical Conformance Board. And that means that you have to have a qualified and certified electrician actually signing off that with a certificate of compliance. Other than that, nothing much more.
Super interesting. So there you go, for the people that are looking to go into EV or the electric space. Michael, follow him on Zimi. Michael, it's been great. So it's a very enlightening conversation, and thank you for joining. We'll be definitely paying attention to your journey and seeing how you guys grow.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.